romper room where we ball a break. Big wins, big losses, all at stake. Party vibe, poker life, always crunk. Feel rich, feel broke, that's just the funk, yeah. Seen boys rise, seen boys fall. Bluffing stacks, risking it all. Got the queens, thought I locked the pot. Straight flush flip, now I'm feeling shot. It's the hustle, it's the grind, no time to assume. All in a faux life in the romper room.
What's up, degenerates, and welcome back to the Romper Room Poker Podcast. Back with another dose of poker wisdom to help you crush those tables. First off, a huge shout out to Ronnie Gonzalez and Eric Trainer for taking down the AHL $500 team plays Sunday at Hideout Bar in Hearst. You guys crushed it. And congrats to Dino Trevino and Danette Roper for snagging second place. Not too shabby at all. For you grinders out there looking for free roll action with big money up for grabs, check out www.ahlpoker.com. That's ahlpoker.com. All right, enough with the congrats. Let's talk some serious poker strategy. Today, we're diving headfirst into the wild, sometimes confusing world of 3-bet pots. And to help us navigate these tricky waters, we've got a true poker Jedi master in the house. He's broken down some killer concepts from Jonathan Little's latest video on mastering 3-bet pots.
Glad to be here.
And we're going to break it all down for you.
Yeah, 3-bet pots. That's where the real action is.
In a way even a donkey could understand.
But they can also be a minefield if you're not careful.
So, MDF. Sounds kind of technical. Break it down for a simple folk. What the hell is MDF, and why should we give a damn?
Well, one of the most fundamental concepts you absolutely need to understand is minimum defense frequency, or MDF for short. Think of it this way. When someone 3-bets you, they're basically saying, I'm not messing around, I've got a strong hand. But you can't just fold every time, right? You need to defend some of your hands to prevent them from just bullying you around. MDF is all about figuring out how often you need to defend your big blind to stop your opponent from profitably bluffing you.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where we're not folding like scared little bitches, but also not just calling with any 2 cards and getting run over.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. You need to defend enough to make them think twice about bluffing, but not so much that you're lighting money on fire with crappy hands. Jonathan Little uses a great example in his video. Let's say the pot is $100, and your opponent goes all in, betting another $100. To figure out your MDF, you divide the bet, $100, by the total pot, which is now $200. That gives you 0.5. Then you subtract that from 1, and you get 0.5 again. This means you need to defend at least half of your hands in that spot.
Damn, 50% against a pot-sized bet. Seems pretty damn wide. I know I'd be folding way more than that in most cases. Is Little saying we should be calling off our stack with trash hands?
Not exactly. He's highlighting a crucial point that a lot of players miss. Folding too much is a huge leak in 3-bet pots. People see a big bet and they panic. They forget that their opponent isn't always holding the nuts. They might be bluffing, or they might just have a hand that's good but not great.
So even if our hand looks like something we found stuck to our shoe after a night at the strip club, we can't just automatically muck it.
Right. You got to think about bet sizing and adjust your defense accordingly. The bigger the bet, the tighter your defending range should be. But the smaller the bet, the wider you can defend. If someone's min betting, you can't be folding hands like top pair or good draws.
Okay, smaller bets, wider defense, big bets, tighter defense. But hold on, we can't just be defending with any 2 cards because our MDF is high.
Yeah.
We still need to have some kind of, decent hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the concept of equity comes in. Every hand you choose to defend with needs to have a realistic chance of winning enough money to justify staying in the hand.
Right, we can't just be throwing chips in the pot hoping to hit a miracle 1-outer.
Yeah.
Got to have some kind of plan.
Exactly. You need to be thinking about your pot odds, the ratio of the current size of the pot to the cost of a call. If the pot odds are good enough, you can even call with some pretty crappy hands if you think you can improve to the nuts or a very strong hand by the river.
So it's all about balancing our MDF with our pot odds and making sure we're not just bleeding chips with weak hands that have no chance of improving.
Exactly. You need to be aware of both concepts and how they interact. It's like a dance. You got to find the rhythm and move with the music.
This shit's starting to make some sense. But let's be real, when we're in the heat of battle, we're not sitting there with calculators and spreadsheets figuring out our MDF and pot odds. Is there a simpler way to think about this defending stuff?
There is, and this is where Jonathan Little's 4 key factors come in. He says you should consider these 4 things when deciding whether to fold, call, or raise in a 3-bet pot. Hand type, nut advantage, stack depth, and position.
Okay, give us the lowdown on these 4 factors.
Yeah.
Hand type seems pretty self-explanatory. We've got our trash hands, our decent hands, and our monster hands.
Right. You've got your junk hands. Those are easy folds, no need to overthink it. Then you've got your marginal made hands, like middle pair, bottom pair, top pair with a weak kicker. Those are the ones that require a bit more thought. And finally, you've got your premium hands, sets, two pair, straights, flushes, flush draws, the nuts. Those are the hands you're generally happy to get all your chips in with.
Okay, so we categorize our hand. What's next on the checklist? Nut advantage. What the hell is that?
Think of it as who is more likely to have the strongest possible hand on a given board. Imagine a flop of queen 10-9. A player who 3-bet pre-flop is more likely to have a queen or a 10 in their hand than someone who just called. That gives the 3-better the net advantage. They're more likely to have the nuts or at least a very strong hand. The general strategy here is to be more aggressive when you have the nut advantage, as you're more likely to have the best hand, and more passive when you don't.
Makes sense. So figure out our hand, figure out if we've got the nuts, then what?
Then you need to consider stack depth. With deep stacks, you have more room to play and can be more speculative with your hands. Those implied odds we talked about earlier become much more important. You can call with hands like backdoor flush draws because if you hit, you can potentially win a massive pot.
Right, deep stacks, bigger pots, more room to gamble. What about when we're playing short stacked? Do we just shove every hand pre-flop and pray for the best?
Not exactly. With shallower stacks, those implied odds disappear. You're less likely to get a big payout if you hit your hand, so you need to be more cautious and focus on winning pots quickly. Big raises pre-flop and on the flop become more common, and all-in confrontations are more frequent.
Got it. Deep stacks, we can loosen up. Shallow stacks, tighten up. And finally, what about position? I know position is always important in poker, but how does it specifically affect our 3-bet pot strategy?
Position is crucial in any poker situation, but especially in 3-bet pots. When you're out of position, it's much harder to play weak hands because you have to act first on every street after the flop.
So we're kind of flying blind when we're out of position.
Exactly. You don't know what your opponent is going to do, so you have to be more cautious and selective with your starting hands. You also need to be more aggressive with your strong hands to build the pot and make it harder for your opponent to outdraw you.
So out of position, play tight and aggressive. Got it. What about when we're lucky enough to be in position? Can we just sit back and wait for the nuts?
Not quite, but in position, you have the luxury of seeing what your opponent does before you have to act. You can call more liberally with a wider range of hands. Knowing that you have more information and options on later streets, you can also be more creative with your bluffs and value bets.
Ah, the beauty of position. Always nice to have that extra edge.
It is indeed. Jonathan Little even pointed out that GTO solutions often show out-of-position players check raising 20 to 40% of the time, while in position players raise much less. This highlights the importance of adjusting your aggression based on your position in the hand.
Okay, so we've got these 4 factors: hand type, net advantage, stack depth, and position. But how do we actually put all this together to make a decision in a real hand? It still seems kind of overwhelming.
Well, Little created this awesome tool called the Bet Response Flowchart to help walk you through the decision-making process step by step.
A flowchart. Sounds a bit nerdy, even for us poker nerds.
It might sound boring, but trust me, this thing is a game changer. It's like having a personal poker coach whispering in your ear, telling you the optimal play in every situation. The flowchart starts by asking you what type of hand you have. If it's junk, fold and move on.
Okay, easy enough. What if we've got something playable?
Then the flowchart takes you down different paths depending on your hand strength, nut advantage, and other factors, leading you to the most profitable decision. It's a brilliant framework for breaking down complex situations into manageable steps.
So it helps us avoid those spewy moments where we make emotional decisions and end up throwing away money.
Exactly. It forces you to think logically and make calculated decisions based on the situation, not your gut feeling.
This flowchart sounds pretty damn useful. Where can our listeners get their grubby little hands on it?
You can download it for free at pokercoaching.com/flowcharts. Little has a whole library of these flowcharts for different poker scenarios, and they're all incredibly helpful. I highly recommend checking them out.
Sweet. We'll make sure to link to those in the show notes. So we talked about MDF, the 4 key factors, and this magical flowchart. Now let's get into some common mistakes that players make in 3-bet pots. What are some of the biggest blunders people are making out there?
One of the most common mistakes, and we've touched on this already, is not folding enough junk hands. People get attached to their cards, or they overestimate the strength of their hand, and end up chasing after hopeless draws and losing big pots.
Yeah, we've all been there. Sometimes it's hard to let go, even when you know you're beat.
It's a tough lesson to learn, but folding is often the best play, especially in 3-bet pots where the stakes are higher.
So sold those garbage hands, kids. Don't be a hero. What are some other common mistakes?
Another mistake is raising marginal made hands too often. Players sometimes feel the need to be aggressive, even when they don't have a particularly strong hand. This can lead to them getting out of line and losing big pots when they face resistance.
So we got to pick our spots carefully. Not just raise for the sake of raising. Got it. Anything else?
Another error is not understanding how to play draws correctly. Some players always raise their draws, no matter how strong they are, while others only raise the absolute nuts.
So it's like they're playing on autopilot, they see a draw, they raise no matter what.
Exactly. You need to be more nuanced and adaptable. Raise your strong draws, call with your weaker ones, and sometimes even fold your draws if the situation calls for it.
Makes sense. Kind of mix it up and keep our opponents guessing. Anything else we should avoid doing?
Finally, and this is a big one, a lot of players make the mistake of only raising when they have the absolute nuts.
Yeah, that's like painting a giant target on your back, right?
Yeah.
Your opponents will figure out your pattern in a heartbeat and exploit the hell out of you.
Exactly. All these mistakes lead to predictable and exploitable ranges, which is the kiss of death in poker. You want to be balanced and unpredictable, making it difficult for your opponents to put you on a hand.
So we got to be sneaky and deceptive, like a ninja in a tuxedo.
Something like that. Think of yourself as a poker chameleon, blending in with your surroundings and changing your colors to confuse your opponents.
I like it. All right, so we've covered the basics of 3-bet pot strategy. The concepts, the common mistakes, the importance of being balanced and unpredictable. Now I'm ready to dive into the nitty-gritty and see how these concepts play out in actual hands.
Me too. I'm excited to break down some specific scenarios and show you how to apply these ideas to real-world situations. All right, so let's dive into some hand examples and see how these concepts play out in real time. Let's revisit that button versus small blind 3-bet pot we were discussing earlier. Remember, the flop comes ace-queen-7, which usually gives the small blind a slight range advantage.
Yeah, those ace-high flops can be tricky to navigate, especially when we're out of position. Remind me, what did the solver suggest for the small blind on this flop?
The solver recommended a polarized betting strategy, either tiny bets or massive overbets.
Whoa, that's pretty wild. Seems kind of counterintuitive to go from a min bet to like a pot-sized bet. What's the logic behind that?
It's all about maximizing value and keeping the button guessing. Those small bets aim to induce bluffs from the button, get them to call with weaker hands. The massive overbets, on the other hand, protect the small blind's equity against strong hands, like ace-king and sets.
So it's like a mind game. We're trying to manipulate our opponent into making the wrong decision. What should the button do when faced with these polarized bets? It seems like a tough spot to be in.
It definitely can be. Against a small bet, the button should be calling pretty wide as they're getting great pot odds. They can also raise small with very strong hands like sets or 2 pairs, or as a pure bluff with hands that block the small blind's range like ace-high or king-high with a good backdoor draw.
So we can get a bit frisky with our bluffs in this spot.
Yeah, but choose your bluffs carefully. Make sure they have some potential to improve on the turn or river. Don't just bluff with any 2 cards. Against a massive overbet, the button needs to tighten up considerably. The pot odds aren't in their favor, so they should only continue with the nuts or very, very strong hands.
Right. No need to hero call against a big bet. We're only sticking around if we've got the goods. What about check raising? Is that an option for the button on this flop?
Absolutely. And once again, the solver recommends a polarized strategy. The button should check raise with either the nuts or a complete bluff. This keeps the small blind guessing and can lead to some big pots if you play it right.
Damn, so many different strategies to consider. It seems like these 3-bet pots involve a lot of mind games and deception.
They definitely do. Reading your opponent and understanding their tendencies is key in these spots. Now, let's fast forward to the turn and see how things change. Jonathan Little stresses how turn cards can completely shift the dynamics of a hand.
Right. A single card can change everything. Let's break down a few different turn scenarios and see how the action might unfold. What happens if the turn is a 3 of clubs? That doesn't seem to change the board texture that much.
You're right, the 3 of clubs doesn't dramatically change the board, but the small blind still needs to adjust their strategy on the turn and check more often than they did on the flop.
Why is that?
Because the button's range is still pretty strong and contains many hands that can continue on this turn. Blindly firing a second barrel is probably not the best play.
So even though the board hasn't changed that much, we need to be more cautious and not just blindly fire away.
Exactly. The goal is to maximize value and avoid getting outplayed. Both players will likely continue to use a polarized betting strategy on the turn, mixing strong hands, draws, and well-disguised bluffs.
Okay, let's imagine a different turn card. What if the turn brings a king instead? That seems like it could be a good card for the small blind.
It is. The king strengthens the small blind's range significantly. They can bet more often. And with a wider range of hands, including some weaker kings, they might have checked on the flop.
So the small blind can really put the pressure back on the button.
Yeah, but the button still has a strong range and shouldn't overfold to turn bets, especially if they have a decent ace or a queen with a good kicker.
Right. We don't want to be folding every time our opponent bets. We need to stand our ground with strong hands. Now for our last scenario. Let's say the turn pairs the board with another 7. What happens then?
Things get interesting when the board pairs. It might seem counterintuitive, but this actually favors the button because they are more likely to have 7s in their range after calling the flop. Remember, many players will call a 3-bet with hands like pocket 7s, ace 7 suited, king 7 suited, and queen 7 suited.
Ah, I see. So the small blind needs to be careful not to run into a monster hand when the board pairs.
Exactly. The small blind should check more often on this turn and use a smaller bet sizing when they do bet. They also need to be prepared to face more raises from the button, who will be emboldened by the paired board.
So it's a constant dance, trying to figure out who has the stronger range and adjust our strategy accordingly.
Precisely. Understanding these turn dynamics is essential for making good decisions and maximizing your profits in 3-bet pots. Always be aware of how the turn card affects both your range and your opponent's range.
This is some high-level poker theory, man. I'm starting to see why 3-bet pots trip so many players up. It's a whole different beast compared to single-raised pots.
It is, but with practice and study, you can master these spots and gain a significant edge over your opponents. The key is to constantly evaluate the situation, consider all the relevant factors, and make well-informed decisions based on logic and reasoning. Don't just rely on gut feelings.
Sound advice. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to discuss one more crucial element of 3-bet pot strategy, pre-flop ranges. Jonathan Little showed some charts in his video that highlighted how ranges change drastically based on position and stack depth. Can you elaborate on that?
Of course. One of the most surprising things about those charts was how wide the small blind's 3-betting range is, especially when facing a raise from the button.
Yeah, I was taken aback by how many hands they were 3-betting. It wasn't just the premium hands like aces, kings, and queens.
Exactly. The small blind is 3-betting a lot of suited connectors, suited aces, and even some offsuit Broadway hands.
Why such a wide range? Seems like they're risking a lot by 3-betting with so many hands that aren't super strong.
It's all about position. Remember, they get to act last on every street, which gives them a huge advantage. By 3-betting a wide range, they can build the pot, put pressure on the button, and potentially steal the pot pre-flop or on the flop.
So position really is power, huh?
Absolutely. And this highlights the importance of adjusting your 3-betting and calling ranges based on your position in the hand. When you're out of position, you need to be more selective with your 3-bets and stick to hands that can handle post-flop pressure.
Makes sense. No need to get fancy when we're playing out of position. We want strong, playable hands. Now, what about stack depth? How does that affect our pre-flop ranges?
Stack depth plays a major role in determining the types of hands you should be 3-betting and calling with. As stacks get deeper, you can 3-bet a wider range of hands as you have more implied odds and more room to maneuver post-flop.
So deep stacks, wider ranges, shallow stacks, tighter ranges. Seems pretty straightforward.
It is, in theory. But the specific hands you should be 3-betting and calling with will still depend on your position and your opponent's tendencies. For example, with deck stacks, you might 3-bet a hand like Queen-Jack suited from the button, but you probably wouldn't 3-bet that same hand from the small blind.
Right. Position trumps stack depth in most cases.
Got it. Man, we've covered a lot of ground today. I feel like my brain is about to overload, but in a good way. This 3-bet pot strategy stuff is fascinating, and I'm definitely eager to try out some of these knowledge at the tables.
Me too. Just remember, practice makes perfect. The more you study and implement these concepts, the better you'll become at navigating those tricky 3-bet pots and crushing your opponents.
All right, we've covered a ton of ground today. MDF, nut advantage, those crazy polarized betting strategies, my head's spinning. But it's all starting to click, and I'm feeling way more confident about tackling those damn 3-bet pots.
That's great to hear. Remember, the key is to keep studying, keep practicing, and never stop learning. The more you understand these concepts, the better equipped you'll be to handle any situation that comes up at the table.
Hell yeah. Poker's all about constantly evolving and adapting our game. Now, before we wrap up, I want to throw out a little challenge to our listeners. A hand scenario to really get those poker brains firing.
I love it. Let's hear it. Okay, picture this. You're on the button, and you raise with ace-king offsuit. The small blind, a tricky little bastard, 3-bets you. You call, and the flop comes king-jack-5 rainbow. The small blind continues the aggression and bets half the pot. What's your play?
Ooh, that's a spicy one. You've flopped top pair, top kicker, which is a great hand in most situations. But in this spot, it's a bit vulnerable. There are a ton of factors to consider. What are the stack depths? What do we know about the small blind's tendencies? Is he a maniac who 3-bets with any 2 cards? Or is he more selective? Is he capable of bluffing? Or is he only betting for value?
Right. It's not just about the cards. It's about the context, the player, the whole damn story. So for all you poker nerds out there, what would you do in this situation? Call, raise, fold. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
It would be great to hear how our listeners would approach this hand and what factors they would consider.
Absolutely. We love getting your feedback and engaging in some poker debate. And hey, maybe we'll even feature some of your responses on the next episode.
Sounds good to me.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the wild world of 3-bet pots. Hopefully you learned a thing or two that you could take to the tables and start crushing those high-stakes games.
Remember, the more you study and practice, the better you'll become. Keep those ranges balanced, exploit your position, and don't be afraid to get creative with your bets.
Damn straight. Poker is all about outsmarting your opponents and having the balls to make big plays when the opportunity arises. So keep grinding, keep studying, and most importantly, keep having fun out there on the felt.
Absolutely. And remember, if you're looking to take your poker game to the next level, make sure you check out Jonathan Little's YouTube channel, his poker coaching app, and his fantastic book, 100 Essential Tips to Master No Limit Hold'em. They're all packed with valuable insights and strategies that will help you improve your game in all areas, not just 3-bet pots.
Couldn't agree more. Jonathan Little is a true poker legend, and his resources are absolute gold for anyone serious about improving their game. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. Be sure to tune in next week, where we'll be dissecting another crucial poker concept and giving you the tools you need to dominate the competition. Until then, good luck in the tables, and may the poker gods be with you.
Romper room where we ball a break. Big wins, big losses, all at stake. Party vibe, poker life, always crunk. Feel rich, feel broke, that's just the funk, yeah. Seen boys rise, seen boys fall. Bluffing stacks, risking it all. Got the queens, thought I locked the pot. Straight flush flip, now I'm feeling shot. It's the hustle, it's the grind, no time to assume. All in a full life in the romper room.